everyone, this is Anita Brown-Graham, Director of the Institute for Emerging Issues, and I'm really excited to host this Google Hangout this afternoon. Many of you who are participating will remember that in February of 2016, we asked a few thousand North Carolinians the question, how does North Carolina prepare its people for the future of work? We focused on the drivers of technological automation and demographics, and it was clear that we were entering into a moment where the skills that people would need to be successful at work were going to look radically different from the ones that many of us grew up focused on. The folks who gathered for the Emerging Issues Forum Future Work picked 3 things that they thought were really important for the state to get serious about, to really bring scale to. And one of those things was project-based learning. In our second day of the forum, we actually hosted hackathons around important sectors in North Carolina, and one of those sectors was banking and finance. We walked away from that conversation again with a pretty clear sense that we needed to get this question of how we get more students opportunities to apply their learning to real-world situations or in the workplace. And so I'm excited to have this afternoon some really great people who are going to help us continue this conversation, dig a little deeper than we were able to do on the second day of the Emerging Issues Forum, and hopefully answer questions that many of you have been sending to us, but they really ought to be sent to our experts. So with me, I've got 2 people. The first 2 are going to serve as moderators for this session. I've got Donnie Charleston, who is our Economy Policy Manager, and as you all will recall, is the person who's leading our program of work on future work. He's been running really hard for the last couple of months. I've also got Michael Viggers, who is a first-year MBA student here at NC State. He is majoring in finance with a concentration on decision analytics. And then our 2 presenters, let me introduce you to Kathy Fawcett, who is with Bank of North Carolina, and James Suh, who is with the National, this is always a difficult one for me to say, so let me get this right, National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. So I want to, instead of reading through your bios, give you all a chance to talk a little bit about your perspective, James and Kathy, on the future of work. How do you see work changing, and how do you see people beginning to prepare or not for the skills that will be at a premium? And Kathy, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Anita.
And I should just say, for those of you who might be wondering where Kathy is, it says everything about the world that we live in, that the Bank of North Carolina's firewalls are such that we don't get to see her gorgeous face, but you'll still have all the benefit of her insights. Kathy, all yours.
Thank you. Indeed, we do have a lot of security going on at the Bank of North Carolina. Thank you for this opportunity. I think from a perspective of the banking world right now, everything is going electronic. I've been in this business for a number of years, and what we used to see as far as a teller, a new accounts person, the brick and mortar, they're still around. Our teller and our new accounts person has now moved into a role that we know as a universal banker. So we see a person coming in, we need them to be able to do telework, count money, understand how the cash system works. We need them to understand what a check is and how a debit and a credit work within an account. We also need them to be savvy when it comes to working with a computer. Of course, everything now is online. All the bank's core systems are online. Bank of North Carolina has not become a paperless bank yet, but we are trying to get there as quickly as we can. And when I say that, we try to do everything online. E-signatures are approved now for the banking world. So there's a lot going on. As far as channels, of course, ATMs have been around for a long time. Online banking is a huge avenue that a lot of our customers are using, and of course mobile. And as I have always said, so many of the technologies that we have in the bank, I think they're generational. We couldn't get people, the older set, to use the ATMs at one time. And now ATMs are sort of the dinosaurs, if you will, for the banking world. And now we're trying to get people into the online banking world, and more especially over into the mobile world. The mobile world will help us, especially with the fraud. Fraud is a big deal right now in the banking world. So we are seeing that. As far as the people that we're looking for young talent, people who are thinkers. They can think on their feet, and who challenge the status quo a lot of times. I think that kind of sums up what I have at this point, I think, Anita.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Kathy. James, we'll turn things over to you. And if you'd say a little bit about what it is you do, and then give us your sense. We actually had a really great conversation in preparation for this Google Hangout, so you know that there's one thing you said to me that I made you promise you would start with. Start there and go from there, please.
Sure. So I've actually am self-taught in analytics, decision sciences. I've got an education background that doesn't necessarily fit into that area, but I think the places that I've stepped into, whether it was the Navy, the Marine Corps, various startup environments, and manufacturing, one of the skills that was always lacking was the data analytics reporting. I think people knew it was available out there, but not necessarily how to use it. I think over the last decade or so, I've developed and trained roughly 10 or so very strong data analysts, and without exception, none of them came into the position with any analytic skill set, or not an adequate skill set to really be off to the races on their own. And only one really came in with what I would consider adequate technical expertise, maybe in Excel and SQL. I think historically we've seen data sets that were very, very small, so a business leader, an executive could say, hey, James, I need you to tell me what the annual revenue is, or how many clients we're expected to gain in the system next year. The complexity of the decisions now and the size of the data sets have sort of limited the executive's ability to ask for specific items. They don't appreciate or understand how big the data sets are available. So, you may get some interesting questions like, why is the CPA profession falling behind in diversity? And most individuals, and we're actually actively working on this particular issue, I think a lot of individuals, executives, individuals asking this question don't appreciate that there's really a big data component to that and what's available to really solve the problem. So when I interviewed and brought individuals into the process, even very recent graduates, they come in with a very good technical expertise. They know how to maybe do the coding. They know how to use a structured data set, pull information out and present it, but they're not very well aware of kind of the what and the why. There's nobody out there defining that component because, and I'm not very involved in the education space, but I'm assuming the projects that they're worked on focus so much on the structured data set versus what most businesses have right now, which is very unstructured, very sloppy. There's a lot of gaps in the data. So not understanding what's usable, what's not usable, why is this metric important to the educational institutions, or why is this different one important or useful to the jurisdictions that are trying to regulate the accounting profession. So I think the gaps that I would love to see filled in education is asking and answering very unstructured questions that are out there. We have, I don't know how familiar the audience is with the accounting profession, but maybe a decade and a half or so ago, the jurisdictions went from 120 hours to 150 hours to become a U.S. CPA. There's some positives to that, but there's also some negatives, but no one's really been able to answer definitively what's the potential or the actual impact this has had on the profession, on the pipeline, diversity, things like that. So hopefully that answers your question about some of the gaps that are out there.
Good. Well, my guess is that Mike, who not only is a student of finance and decision analytics, but before he came into the MBA program was in education, is probably jumping up and down. I'll let he arm wrestled with Donnie on the moderation. So Mike, Donnie, they're all yours. Take it away.
Thanks, Anita.
Thank you, Anita. Mike, did you have a question you wanted to pose? I know you have experience, basically, it's from a student's perspective in terms of preparing for a career in finance, banking, and technology. And so any questions you have or any insights you want to offer about, maybe some theories you have about how automation is potentially affecting your job search and, your concerns about your future.
Sure. Well, thanks, Donnie. I think the first thing, actually, something related to what James was talking about, is the dealing with data sets and dealing with trying to actually manage the difference between structured and unstructured. And so one of the things that I have found in our program here is dealing with the difficulties and challenges associated with authentic situations versus some kind of more contrived models. So I guess, James, from your perspective, talking about what people are walking in with and without, do the real life cases and more authentic types of case studies that should probably yield some unstructured data sets, are those serving to effectively prepare people, or what other pieces of the puzzle might be missing?
James, I think you have your microphone muted? Yeah, I think we maybe have lost James' audio.
I can see him.
Can you hear me right now?
I hear you now.
Great.
Sorry, I'm actually using an iPad app. Maybe I should have logged in from my computer. So I think working on maybe real-world problems and starting, I would imagine when you're in an educational institution, in order to really get individuals to an endpoint, you need to have what's considered the right answer. When we look at the information here, almost nothing really yields a correct answer, right? It's correct answer based on perspective and how you're applying that decision. So, if you look at the 150-hour rule, for instance, it may have been very beneficial to improving the strength of a group of candidates who came up through a certain pipeline through some of the premier institutions, but it may have had a detrimental impact on the profession as a whole as far as the total throughput or maybe the access for minorities into the profession. And I'm not saying this is the case, but in many instances you're going to have a good answer and a bad answer depending on who you're applying that to. So if you look at some of the more complex real-world examples that we're dealing with, we had one in Maine that allowed us to change some legislation out there. The governor said, you know what, we don't think the education requirements for accounting are required. It shouldn't be that stringent. So let's just back that out and make just a degree required. Well, overnight, they went from maybe 100 to 200 applications a year to over 3,000 applications a year going into Maine, predominantly from international students, which improves the pipeline, but the quality reduced dramatically, and it started to pose a risk to the public. So maybe the gap that I see there is maybe looking at current real-world problems and using the output or the answer to that to discuss, in what context is this the right answer, in what context is it a bad answer, versus trying to get to a yes or no. A lot of the individuals coming out here they tell me which is the right way to go, and you really can't do that with the sets that we're using right now, the data sets. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. I think so one thing you definitely talked about, at least what I heard from you, was talking about better synergy between educational institutions, organizations like yourselves, and actual employers. And so Kathy, from the standpoint of Bank of America, and as you continue to grow, do you think that you'll be have a need for students having better work-based learning opportunities like internships or project-based learning initiatives, such that you guys have a pipeline of workers that are better prepared?
Yes, and for the record, it's Bank of North Carolina.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Bank of America is a little bit larger than Bank of North Carolina. Bank of North Carolina has grown. We've doubled our size in the last 4 years, mainly through merger and acquisitions. And as I hear them talking about data sets and metrics, I will say metrics are a huge part of the banking world. Everything is tracked. Everything is, we look at monthly, quarterly, annual. Sometimes we look at daily stats. So I think that there are so many skill sets that, depending on what branch of banking you would like to go into, the financial world, that whole realm has so many opportunities out there. Whether it's accounting, we have a few CPAs on staff. There's so much that can go on there. I do think that having a person who comes out of college, my thing is, if you can get, and I would encourage anyone to try to get into a summer internship at a bank, and that would give you a taste of what goes on in a bank. A lot of times, if you can go in, even if you go in as a teller or a person who works on the retail side of the bank, that gives you the opportunity to learn just some basics within the financial industry. A lot of times I know people, if they don't get in at an early age, when I say early age, I'm talking perhaps high school, and I've had people before who worked summer internships through the latter part of their high school years and through college, and who then would go on in talking about accounting. Had a gal that I actually reside in Salisbury, and I worked for a bank in Salisbury for a number of years. I had a gal picked up, and she worked high school summers, and then throughout college, she went to UNC, and she's had a pretty good career now with Food Lion, which is based here in Salisbury. So I would encourage individuals, if they're not taking classes year-round, maybe to look at getting into some type of an internship, and don't be afraid to ask. Go to these institutions, these smaller businesses, and ask about the possibility of doing, an internship. Does that answer what you were questioning me?
Most definitely. I think when we get into this, down into the meat of it, we find that, at least what we're finding in terms of our own research after the forum, is that there are so many different navigational paths that people are taking to get on ramps into what we're kind of calling the future economy, in terms of what employers saying they need versus what they aren't necessarily getting in terms of students, in terms of their post-secondary training. So Kathy, you mentioned one way in terms of getting your foot in the door with respect to being a teller or in another occupation, and then kind of getting the skills you need and building on that as you move forward. So James, question to you, outside of the classroom, how can students begin to develop the skills you'd like to see when they walk in the door? Because you mentioned your own training. So could you give some students some insight in terms of what they can do to make sure that they're prepared? Because I know we're moving to an era wherein credentials are becoming devalued, and so people are very much coming to the door these days with taking online MOOCs and other types of avenues to get the assets and trainings that they need.
Right. So I would imagine, as in many careers, probably a curiosity is going to be the thing that I look for the most in finding or identifying an analyst. So if you're looking at a data set, let's say, and you're at an institution, university, trying to get your degree, like, oh my goodness, here's another data set, this is a question, let me try to answer it very quickly. You're probably not going to enjoy a career in that field, and you're probably not going to add a lot of value to the organization. The curiosity is somebody that looks at something and says, wow, something just doesn't look right. The numbers are close, but there's something a little different here. So, you'll see them in the evenings or on the weekends kind of digging through, popping messages saying, hey, I found this. What do you think about A, B, and C? Because that really leads to a true understanding of the information that's out there, because it's all the small anomalies that cause, I think, poor decision-making if they're not well understood. And we have countless instances of that here. The other part, I think, for students to recognize is most individuals, and I assumed this when I graduated university 18 years ago, that you're going to get out there and you're going to have a very limited skill set relative to your peers or the leaders or the executive in an organization. We're in an era where that's absolutely not the case. The individuals that are coming out, they have the how, right? How do you mechanically do this? and assume that the business leader is going to be able to tell them what to do and the executive is going to be able to tell them why they need to do that. I would tell you that in many, many instances, and I would imagine a vast majority of the institutions students are going to be going to, that those two pieces are missing, because in order to answer the what and be able to explain the why, they have to understand the technical components, not just what we have available from a data set, but what the limitations of those data are. What can we use the information for, what can we not, and what are the risks of using a set for certain decisions. So again, maybe to simplify, just that curiosity, and then just understanding that the execs, the leaders that they're reporting to, may not have that other skill set that's required.
So Mike, you've been hearing quite a bit from these guys who are actually working in the field, and there's this huge need just to have students prepared and ready to hit the ground running. From your perspective, how can we reach more students, help them prepare for the changes ahead? I mean, especially from the student's perspective, like you're living it, or you just recently lived it.
Sure. So that's a great question. I think one of the things that students are kind of grappling with in terms of how to best prepare for certain jobs in these industries are really trying to identify the best way to bridge a skills gap. I've always appreciated the ability, for example, to use data to tell stories. And sometimes the person who's really good at telling the story with the data doesn't necessarily have the technical expertise to deal with as many, for example, of the unstructured variables. And so from a student perspective, seeking more opportunities to really do the authentic and project-based approaches, I think, are really a key for getting the insight necessary to really be able to not only find opportunities, but to be able to contribute immediately when given the opportunity to join an organization, especially in this space.
And we've got some questions that are coming in as people are listening. And one question came in from someone who actually sounds like they're an educator in the public school system, and they're asking, says, how can I best collaborate with businesses and or the private sector to create project-based learning activity within the classroom? So they're asking about the collaboration piece with industry. So Kathy, would you, or James, either one of you can kind of chime in on that one?
Hey, it's Kathy. I think that what you have to do there is just reach out to, and I'll talk banking since that's what I'm most familiar with, reach out to your local branch, find out where operations for the bank might be. If you are dealing with, let's go to Bank of America here, they have a lot of operational opportunities down in Charlotte. They also have some, I think, opportunities in Raleigh. They have some hubs around for Bank of North Carolina. We are located in High Point and Thomasville. We do serve South Carolina and Virginia. We do have some operational areas around as well. We have partnered with High Point University over the years because they're right in our backyard, if you will. And we've gotten some very good input from the university. And we brought them in, and as James was saying, we brought them in and said, here's what we need. And maybe they ran reports for us, maybe they extracted information, maybe they worked with data in particular ways. And they're now full-time employees, and they've been here for a while. I also think that just reaching out and offering opportunities up just to see what these institutions, it wouldn't have to be a bank necessarily. I think you could get into any type of small business and just try to get your toe in the door, if you will, there to get that. And I think what I'm hearing also is I think that the number of the applicants, if you will, or those that these students are saying, they want all of their new hires to have experience, but how can I get experience when no one will hire me? So you're shaking your head. And that's what I have heard just over and over throughout the years that I have been in the public sector is, how am I supposed to gain the experience when no one will hire me? And therein lies the problem. I think I felt that way before I ever got into banking as well. And there's where networking is so important. and always being on top of your game, and wherever you are, making sure that you have that persona or that appearance that you're ready to speak. And if someone were to ask you, oh, what is it you're looking for, I might know someone in a business that could use you, and be prepared to talk about what your goals are. Let it be a number one priority for you.
And James, did you have any insights you wanted to offer?
Yeah, so my take, I think it's going to be difficult for a school, particularly a secondary school, high school, to go out and approach a business and say, hey, let us do your analytics work, because it's an area where institutions or organizations tend to spend a lot of money. However, I would say if you were to step out and look for organizations probably need the help and are poorly funded, let's say a local non-for-profit, and I think when we consider volunteering and not-for-profit, it's maybe collecting food or hammering some boards together, building a house, things like that. But I think very few people step in and approach an institution and say, hey, we've got a class or we're doing analytics. We'd love to look at or work on a small project for you. What zip codes do we tend to have the most donations from? What's the area of greatest need? It becomes a small project, something the school could work on, and something that's immensely valuable to the local community, and that gives the students exposure to some real-world elements. And then going to some of the hiring, comment that it's you can't get hired if you don't have the experience. I think the environment's sort of bifurcating a little bit, where some organizations want only individuals who have a significant amount of tenure and expertise in the area. The other side, this is the camp that I reside in, I believe that the skill set associated with actually mechanically doing the data and the analysis is far easier to teach and develop than the decision-making and the curiosity component. How do you make certain decisions? Why is this element more important than that other element? If someone comes in and they can show that they have a very good comprehension of sort of the business acumen, decision-making process, but they're not quite very gifted or talented on the analytics side, I'd be more than willing to go down the path of teaching that person the analytics component.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned earlier the idea of people coming in and not necessarily having skills with SQL and Excel and so forth. And over time, we've seen technology really create a shift within banking and finance in terms of, years ago we saw that there were, accountants on, nearly every street corner, especially when tax season comes around. But now TurboTax and Tax Act and all these software applications have come online and it really changed that industry. And earlier, Kathy mentioned how automatic teller machines have really caused a shift in the banking industry. So from the standpoint of technology specifically, how can students prepare themselves, in terms of real-world training, gaining real-world insights? How can they prepare themselves, and what technologies do they need to kind of interface with so that they're ready for work when they hit the ground running, so that they can hit the ground running rather?
Right. So the way I've approached training is understanding that there's more that you can possibly learn than anyone could do in 100 lifetimes. So if you get out and you want to become the absolute expert in any potential or every potential application that any company could possibly use, I would say that's not a winning strategy. Showing the ability to learn and then picking up what would be considered the core skills. And for me, it's someone who has a good understanding of SQL and Excel. I know there are a lot of other tools available out there. I would say we do 90% of our work, 80 to 90% of our work in the Excel side, because it has become a pretty comprehensive tool. And it's a skill set that many either come to the organization with or can develop pretty quickly. And I would say half the learning that the individuals in the organization do is based on Google, right? You can find anything. If there's not anything you could do in Excel, or you need to do that, you can't Google to find a YouTube video.
Yeah, Kathy, what about on the the banking side for Bank of North Carolina, from the standpoint of technology that students need to make sure that they're up on, so that they can be able to hit the ground running when they enter your workplace?
Definitely, basic computer skills are a must. If you don't have that, if you're afraid of a computer, as there are still people like that out there, it probably won't make it too far. We do use a lot of computer systems that are, we use third-party systems. We do write programs within those systems. Sometimes we use SQL. We use some Cognos reporting, of course, Excel, Access databases. We use a variety of things here at Bank of North Carolina. I think that what we try to do is we are starting to get into pretty heavily into establishing workflows so that we can make things easier for individuals, and that's where we can go out and write the process for doing a particular function within, and I'm talking operations in banking here more so than what we call the retail side, which would be the customer-facing side. But let's say you needed to refund a service charge to a customer. We want to have a workflow set up so that that can be automated and can go through there. And even though I'm talking about automation in banking, we still have to have individuals who can write that automation. And even though a lot of things have become automated, we still have to have those individuals either on the telephone. If someone looks at their account through online banking or mobile and they have a question about it, let's say a transaction has come in and they get a text that says, hey, we just have a $500 debit card transaction for you at Best Buy, and the customer calls and says, I'm not at Best Buy and that was not my transaction. And that's where we have to get the human part in there, and we have to have individuals who know fraud, who understand how electronic fraud works. And again, we get back to the basic debits and credits within the banking industry, and as long as you've got a good basic understanding there, you can pretty much go with that. As this morning, I was working with James to get all set up for this, and in our IT department, we have a fraud unit. We have people, and all they do is work with the firewalls, setting up all the security within the bank. There are so many channels here that we would deal with. That one, we need to protect the customer data, but we also need to protect the bank's data as well. So this whole online cyber security is a huge, huge market right now, and I would certainly encourage those who are training, those who are out looking to see, what areas should I learn more about. And the cyber world is definitely, I think, where it's at from a banking perspective.
So Mike, I'd like you to kind of chime in from the standpoint of how prepared do you think you are with respect to your post-secondary education in college and your exposure to things like Excel and SQL and those practical applications. I had the opportunity to teach a graduate course this past semester. That's one of the questions I asked my students was, how prepared, how well versed are you with Excel? Because many times universities are still teaching students how to engage with SAS, SPSS, and other software applications. But in the real world, as James mentioned earlier, many times Excel is your primary software platforms you're going to be working with. So how prepared have you been made with regards to your post-secondary education?
Sure. So one of the things that we've done a lot actually with the SAS suite in our analytics work, but we've also not only had a lot of opportunities to work with Excel, but actually our program has taken the initiative to offer some advanced Excel training, and kind of acknowledging how important Excel still is. But a lot of people are used to it only from the perspective of maintaining a database and setting a filter on a data table, rather than doing any sort of advanced analytics work. And so we're trying to push and kind of go beyond those horizons and try to find some new ways to bring that Excel knowledge in. But I don't think that it's as universal in terms of people being as familiar with Excel. I know SQL certainly is something that I'd like to learn more about and have as something that I'm more of an expert in. I know virtually nothing about it now. And I guess that when Kathy was talking about that IT connection to banking, I guess my question from that perspective too is not that is finance less important for banking, but how well versed in things like technology and data security should someone who is actually focusing on finance or on banking be going forward? In other words, is it something that you should expect to pick up along the way, or is it something that you should really do some study, whether formally or case studies and projects, that sort of thing, to really be able to contribute immediately in the sector?
I think to contribute immediately, anything that you could bring to the table if you were to come to work for Bank of North Carolina, and let's say that we were looking for someone who could help us with cybersecurity and with educating our individuals who work here at Bank of North Carolina. We send out a weekly email, sometimes it's several times a week, that we advise all of our employees about the various techniques that the hackers would use to try to get to an individual and try to get you to open a link or something on your computer. And of course, we have lots of different products, different antivirus and what have you, softwares to try to prevent anything from occurring. But I think that if someone had some experience, and I would think this could be classroom learning, something they learned on their own, but if the more versed they are in, oh, here is this product that prevents this, or oh, I know exactly what spear phishing is, or I know what a man-in-the-middle attack is, or whatever the situation might be, certainly they could add more value. It wouldn't be them coming in and sitting down and trying to catch up, if you will, from a beginning meeting.
I mean, so as we think about many of these challenges, I think as James mentioned earlier, it's going to be difficult for the individual teacher to kind of do the outreach to industry to get what she needs in terms of her classroom. So much of this is going to have to happen at the institutional level, at the state level, at the regional level even. So from the standpoint of your respective industries or organizations, James and Kathy, what are some insights you have in terms of how can we accelerate, project-based learning, in terms of finance and banking industry, such that we are preparing students in college and in high school to, actually establish those career pathways, through those project-based learning opportunities. What can we do at the institutional level between organizations, between industry and the educational sectors to make sure that we, pushing the accelerator to make this happen?
So maybe I'll take a quick shot at it. I would imagine this is sort of a newer field that's starting to be taught at the universities. And I don't know if you guys have had a chance to reach out to your recent graduates over the last 4 to 5 years to understand which of the skills they've been taught have been immediately applicable. For instance, you have SAS and SPSS, which is fantastic. I would imagine it's available pretty broadly in the larger organizations and within the finance sector. But there's two problems. In a lot of instances, an individual who's a new hire may not have access to that application because it's a pretty controlled group, or they could be going to the 95% of organizations, companies that can't afford licenses to SAS or SPSS, or they're not sophisticated enough. There may be an opportunity to teach students different skill sets or get deeper into different skill sets depending on what their potential career track is. If you're getting into finance or a very, very heavy analytics role, I would say absolutely, let's continue with the SAS, SPSS, and develop that skill set. If there's an individual who doesn't have an interest in that and more likely going into the some of the other professions, whether it's a kind of a startup environment or non-for-profit places like that, maybe the focus really is on the more practical skill sets around Excel, SQL, things like that. They're probably going to be able to use to be more effective. And really, as I mentioned before, digging into the ability to ask questions and develop the what and the why scenarios that may be lacking from the business leaders that they report to in the future.
So, Kat, did you have any insights you wanted to offer?
Well, I want to agree with what he just said. Bank of North Carolina does use SAS. It's a very powerful. It's very powerful. We have a dashboard, and that's how we've been able to really streamline some things and really pull some metrics together. So, yeah, definitely SAS. We respect and love SAS at Bank of North Carolina. The other thing that I think, and looking at this more from a perspective of not necessarily a person who's going to work in security or the information technology world, but let's say that you had someone and they wanted to focus more on the what we know in the banking sector as the retail side of the bank, which means I'm working in the, I'll call it the brick and mortar. I'm in a branch and I take loan applications or I open new accounts for individuals, or I am that customer facing person. And I think there you get down to, of course, basic social skills. Your again, what you know, how you, what your appearance is like, and how you treat those individual customers. I know over the years I've seen customers follow people from bank to bank. If someone left one bank and went to another bank, they took their customer base with them, and I think that still happens. I was reading an article just yesterday where Raymond James, the big investment company, will not be going to a telephone-based or robo-based application because their customers don't want that. So when you have someone who wants to talk investments, they literally want to talk investments. Some people might want to, like a day trader, might want to sit and do his own thing, but I think we still have that sector of the population, and probably will have for a long time to come. They want to have that one-on-one FaceTime, if you will. And I think that's an important thing, too, is that when you get in and you learn, and again, I'm going back to that basic debit and credit. If you're programming, you need to know how a debit's going to impact your end result. If you're talking to a customer and they say, what does this check do to my account? Well, it's going to take the money out of your account. You know, I think that there are some basics there. And I think it depends on the individual. And I have seen this, too. There are people who feel like they should work with customers, and then once they get to working with those customers, we go, you know, you would really do better in operations. It's kind of like the person who has a face for radio, and we find out that people really need to be working in operations, and they're happier doing that. There are people who really like that customer contact, and there are people who really like to work more in analytics and in more of an operational back office, if you will, type thing.
We have another question that has come in. So this question is really related to the type of educational institution. So from the standpoint of either one of you, Kathy or James, what's more value to you in terms of someone with a technical college degree or someone with a four-year university? Is there a preference for one degree or the other, over the other?
So I would say I have limited experience with individuals coming with a kind of a technical institution. Everyone's come from the four-year degree background. So I don't want to put too much weight on what I'm saying, but because my focus has been on finding people who are just very interested in the full breadth, not just having the mechanical skills to do something, but understanding why that decision is necessary and how it applies to the broader business environment. I would say somebody with the kind of a four-year degree, if it's a broader education versus, you know, you can get the same technical degree in a four-year institution as you get in the tech school, I would probably lean towards that.
And I would concur with James on that too. I generally advise any young person to go ahead and get that four-year degree. I just feel like that corporate America is almost requiring that. I know that there seems to be a little bit of a trend back toward the technical or community schools, and I certainly think that they are very important. But what I've seen is a number of people will do a community college and then transfer over to finish out a four-year degree. So I would agree with James on that.
So I wanted to kind of see if anyone had any parting thoughts or ideas you wanted to get out there before we sign off from anyone.
I guess a question potentially for Kathy, to some extent, to circle back to one of the first things that she had said, is how to bridge the gap between increasingly digital presence and increasingly digital demand in the banking sector. A lot of my classmates I know, because of schedules and everything, bankers' hours don't work to actually go to a retail bank, and so much more is being done online. and taking advantage of apps and that sort of thing. So whether it's adjusting to that while still providing that great level of customer service for people who are more familiar with the brick and mortar, as well as, I guess, identifying what sort of a workforce you need to build out and serve all the different customers. If you could speak to that.
Sure. You're exactly right. We're no longer, the banking industry is no longer a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 on Friday any longer. It's a 24/7. And while Bank of North Carolina does not staff for a 24/7 support, if you will, as far as the telephone sector there, we do run our mortgage people. You know, you have to be prepared to do just about whatever it is that your customer needs, and that's what we try to do, is meet that customer need. There are people who work. We do run a support until 11 o'clock at night, and then we run a Saturday support as well. And I do feel that as we move on with these digital channels, you know, there's coming a day. I remember in my early years of banking, we were going to become a checklist society. That has not occurred yet, but we are well on our way to getting there. I think at some point we may become that cashless society. I'm seeing that more now than I ever have before. And with the onset of the smartphone, we don't need a debit card anymore. We can use that smartphone for just about anything. Even to go ahead and prep, if you're going to use cash, you can. There's technology out there now that will allow you to prep that withdrawal from the ATM, get to the ATM, hold your smartphone to the ATM, and it's going to disperse your cash for you. So the technology is really unbelievable out there. But I think that as one gets ready to get into the corporate world, if you're expecting a 9 to 5 job, I'm not exactly sure where you would find that any longer. Does that help with what you were asking?
It does. Also, just thinking about, I guess, bridging the gap, because banking, a lot of times we think finance and banking, but certainly to kind of handle the apps and dealing with an increasing mobile platform, the finance side needs to fit in, but I guess I see that there's opportunities maybe for someone who's not your conventional finance person to help out in that space as well.
That would be correct. We offer support for those who don't understand how to use particular apps. Most of the questions that come in, though, are from individuals who don't understand what is going on with their account. I think that if we want to talk about bridging a gap, I think that we have to have individuals who understand. And I would advise anyone, you know, how do I get into banking? Well, first of all, do you have an account in a bank yourself? Do you have a checking account? Do you understand how it works? There you go. If you've got that, you know, that's part of you've got almost a good start right there. That's a good foundation. But as we get phone calls, sometimes it is about an app. But so many of the calls that come in, a lot of them have to do with the true what's happening with my checking account, or, you know, whatever. We do get a lot of calls, though, especially on the online banking side, of people who can't, you know, I can't download, I can't do this, and we do have to talk them through certain things on their particular computer. Maybe they need to upgrade to, you know, what version of Windows are you running, or have you cleared, you know, the cookies and whatever. So yes, you're exactly right. You do have to have the ability to bridge that gap.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Banking and finance are definitely strong sectors in North Carolina, and we are all in, you know, all indicators point to the fact that it will continue to grow in the state. And so we know that educators and institutional leaders will be, you know, paying attention to how technology is going to be affecting the industry, just so we can make sure that we're staying ahead of the curve, so to speak. But we're coming to a close. I want to thank Kathy, Mike, and James participating in the call. And this discussion will live on. It'll exist on our website and our YouTube channel. We'll be pushing it out to all the audiences we engage with, the tens of thousands of people who have been IEI supporters and fans over the years. And so this will definitely live on. But I also want to point out that for all of you out there who are listening, be tuned in to IEI over the next week or so, you'll hear more information about us coming to your community, bringing you some of this information about the Future Work Bus Tour. And so we'll be discussing many of these changes right in your community. So we're bringing that to you. It'll be data informed. We'll be bringing a bus that has what we're calling a digitally equipped bus. And so you'll definitely see some great things happening the next week with IEI. But thanks again to all of my participants, and especially to Kathy from Salisbury, North Carolina, my hometown. So thank you for joining us. And log in, ask your questions, and we'll try to get answers to your questions if you didn't have an opportunity to get your answers today. Thank you once again to the participants, and goodbye to everyone out there in the virtual world.
Thanks, Dustin.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.